than they will in an organization like Mahindra or any other company. And why do I say that? See, when I was the chief sustainability officer and I was looking for people, um, what we really needed was, say, an operations man with some understanding of sustainability, a finance man with some understanding of sustainability, because the core job of operations and the core job of finance still had to be done. If there was a person who was a sustainability professional, there was a role, but that role would be in the sustainability team. um, Very unlikely that the person would have a very long career in that team without a second or a third area of strength. So I remember when IIM Lucknow was setting up their MBA in sustainability course, I did take interns by the dozen. But when the turn came to employ the graduates, I saw that their career potential in an organization like ours was somewhat limited. So Shauri, who was heading the program, also a colleague of mine from IMA, we actually brainstormed and came up with answers to the question of where should the students go, which mapped very closely to all the places that you mentioned, Sandeep, where your students are going today. So in a sense, I'm delighted that you are placing your students in just the right places. You will find a lot of organizations looking for sustainability professionals today. It's a good place to go for a little while and learn how business operates and then move on to make wider impact, because most of the work that sustainability professionals get to do today in large corporations is in the area of reporting and disclosures, which to me is not very good utilization of the talent of a sustainability professional. So that's where I see the space today. I hear a lot of my peers in business saying we need people in sustainability. And when I ask them, what are you going to make them do for you? Will you help them ensure that operations gets transformed, that supply chain gets transformed, that you're able to significantly reduce your emissions? Well, as of now, that's not what they have in the JD. So I don't know whether you like the answer or like the perspective, Sandeep, but this is how the ecosystem seems to be operating today. Let me go to the next one on greenwashing. My fear is greenwashing is only just starting. And it is only just starting because all of a sudden people have realized that they cannot not be engaged in ESG activities. And unfortunately, in business, everyone wants to be a leader even before they start. So that leads to a sort of situation where you have to take what you have and package it and make it appear much better than what it actually is. And therefore, my fear is that we are going to see a lot more of greenwashing in the future than we have seen so far. But then there are other very good developments happening. There are these two organizations, ICVCM and VCMI, both of whom are working to build integrity around sustainability claims, integrity around offsets, integrity around what could be called genuine claims, and so on. So I'm sure there'll be a body of work that will try and reduce the possibility of greenwashing in the ecosystem. But don't expect it to go away anytime soon. We will have to tread carefully, just as we have had to tread with marketing communications in many product categories, especially FMCG, where we were often told that, oh, this has no sugar, but we were never told that it has some other cancer causing substance that is adding sweetness to the product. So these kinds of risks will remain, and we will have to tread very carefully. The third you mentioned was how Republicans in America are looking at ESG and saying this is all hogwash. Well, interestingly, the first campaign that we did or joined was a campaign which simply said climate change is real. And it was a hashtag, and you just had to make the assertion that you believed that climate change is real. We've come a long way from there. The number of believers of climate change is way higher now than the number of disbelievers, though, as you know, there is always a constituency which makes a larger amount of noise. To my mind, the Republican position is a bit of a distraction because even in the US, there are enough people who understand the issue and are taking action on the issue. We all know that there was a time when US pulled out of the Paris Accord. The good news was even then, more than half the states were came up with a campaign called "We Are Still In," and it is around that time that General Motors, despite all its Republican leanings, committed to become 100% renewable energy, and all their energy was going to come from renewable energy was going to come from Texas, another Republican state, whose governor would often talk about ESG being something is hogwash, shall we say. So I don't think we should let those distractions bother us too much. In fact, we've gone through the cycle which any new thing goes through. So at some time, and when I say sometime, my exposure is from around 2014 or so. There was a lot of conversation that, yes, sustainability is not real, climate change is not happening, it doesn't exist. It was quite a loud conversation. Then it went on to, it exists, but I have nothing to do with it. And there were lots of people who would say, oh, no, the government has to do this, or US has to do this, or the Western world would say, oh, developed countries have to do this, and so on. Then we entered a stage that it exists. I may have something to do with it, but the solutions lie with other people. In fact, those of you who have followed the negotiations at COP would have seen this play out year after year, and seeing how positions have gradually changed and how nations and organizations have gradually taken on the responsibility and have started saying that it exists, as in climate change exists. I have something to do with it, but I don't know what to do. That is the conversation that I find in many corporate rooms today. In fact, over the last week, I've had the opportunity to speak to industries like the infotech industry, who often ask the question, what are we supposed to do in the area of climate solutions, even if we did want to do something. So that's the stage at which most conversations are. I'm hoping that very soon most of us will transition to the next stage, which is climate change exists, I have something to do with it, and I know what to do. Um, Fortunately for us, there's a lot of help from uh, the NGOs, the non-profit world, the climate activists, and so on, trying to give us a sense of what needs to be done. But when you get into sustainability, there's a lot of noise, and a lot of noise starts because you put 100 things in front of the organizations to do, and most organizational leaders can't deal with 100 things at the same time. So it's important to cut through the noise and understand what are the problems we are really trying to solve. At one level, sustainability is an old thing. There are organizations that have been around for 100 years, 150 years, and so on. These organizations have, in the course of their life, done what they thought was required to be sustainable. But if you want to be sustainable for the next 100 years, obviously you have to do some other things. And what these other things are, it's important to understand in a simplified way and not look at a list of 100 things to do. What I'm going to share with you is from our Mahindra experience. What we found is that we are broadly solving for 3 or 4 problems. In the environment space, we are solving for egregious pollution, and we are solving for material scarcity. These are the 2 major problems that are driving everything else. In fact, the end result of most of the things we have done. And by saying things, I mean technologies we've adopted, ways we have developed society, has ultimately, through many intermediate variables, ended up in causing a disbalance in biodiversity in the world. And this is why IIFM plays a very critical role, because I find most of the graduates of IIFM understand this biodiversity disbalance more than anybody else. But that's what happens as the end result. And it gets there because of the paths we have taken to development. And these paths have led to egregious pollution and have from time to time led to various forms of material scarcity. Today, we are worried that we'll run out of lithium and cobalt and nickel and so on. When I was in college, we were worried we would run out of petroleum, but this just continues because of our development path. So egregious pollution, material scarcity in the environment space are two problems we are trying to solve. In the social space, it's the age-old problem of equity, equality, and harassment. That has every issue that we discuss lies in the solution to this problem space. And in the governance space, it's about transparency and stakeholder capitalism. Again, not a new concept. We have grown up saying that, okay, we have to go beyond the shareholder. There are other stakeholders in the ecosystem. Very often the CSR conversation leads to that. But whatever it may be, these are the core problems we are trying to solve through the work on sustainability. The main problem, to my mind, is the environmental problem, which is why all this has become such a big thing. Because issues of equality, equity, harassment, issues of stakeholder capitalism, transparency are things that have been there forever in industry and nothing new uh, in these subjects. So even as we are trying to solve it, the dominant conversations are sustainability is expensive, not my job, and so on. So, what has been the experience in the Mahindra Group? First, we found that climate action is the biggest growth opportunity of this century. Not only is it a growth opportunity for many industries, it's actually um, it's going to influence survival. And why do I say that? Well, very simply, if our automotive industry does not make the transition to clean mobility, in 10 to 15 years' time, our business will not exist. It is not the only business in this situation, because the effort to solve for the climate problem is leading to a lot of technology transitions in many industries. We are now in the process of observing and experiencing the transition of the manufacturing process of many metals, industries which we call hard to abate. That in turn will lead to a huge churn in the equipment used, the fuel used, and so on. 74% of the emissions of the world uh, are because of the way we generate and use energy. So most of the upheavals are obviously going to happen in that space. And our experience shows that if you are able to address this technology transition, you simultaneously ensure that the business does well in the future, it becomes more resilient, and becomes a part of the climate solution and is not a part of the climate problem. So in the group, we've got the transition to electric vehicles. We've got the transition to green buildings. We had a small investment in a waste to energy plant, which we've now sold because we found we don't handle this business very well. And so there are many. We've invested in renewable energy, as you know. And so there are many business opportunities in the effort to provide a solution for the climate problem. So this is the reason why we find that that climate action is the biggest opportunity of this century. Now, uh, a common question raised is sustainability is expensive. That if you try to take climate action, you have to spend a lot of money and there are no returns, and it is not economically feasible, and so on. Well, this is only partially true. In the transition towards a cleaner planet, there are a lot of solutions that are necessary, some of which are economically feasible and some of which are not. So just to keep things simple, today, energy efficiency, extremely economically feasible. Clean hydrogen, not yet economically feasible. However, we know that it will follow the same path that solar energy has taken, that batteries are taking, that electric vehicles are taking, and over a period of time become economically feasible to implement at scale. So this is true of any industry, even before the conversation on climate started. So if once you have that perspective, the question then becomes, what is it that we can do now? And thankfully, there are a lot of things that we can do now. I just want to leave one number with you, that investment of about 245 crores over a 5-year period in Mahindra businesses in areas which would lead to decarbonization has resulted in a savings annuity of 145 crores per year. As you can see, the returns on the investments made over 5 years is very, very high indeed. And it is very rare for the overall business to give you returns like this. So the path we took was every rupee that we could spare, which could go into decarbonization, which could go into things that facilitated climate action. We would invest in that area, and as the results show that the returns were very, very good indeed. So the question was always, how much more can we possibly do? So two discoveries: one, biggest growth opportunity of the century; second, it actually reduces cost; third, climate action reduces a lot of risk. It reduces today the three risks that it reduces. One is the risk of being non-compliant, second, reputational risk, and third, license to operate. Revenue risk, etc., limited impact today, but over time, depending on the industry you're in, there will be issues related to revenue risk. If you are in the supply chain of a large organization, and if you don't have a very strong climate action portfolio, then the likelihood of increasing share of business is low. The likelihood of losing share of business very high. So in the supply chain, the risk of revenue is probably higher than in, say, in a B2C business, where the risk of revenue is somewhat lower today, unless you're in a situation like we are, which is the transition to electric vehicles must happen before revenue just completely disappears. But why the risk of non-compliance keeps going down if you work seriously in the climate field? Because every time a new regulation comes, you're usually ahead of the pack, and your ability to respond to that new requirement in compliance, such as BRSR today, you've already built it up over time. So the risk of being non-compliant in any area is low. The second area in which the risks are very low is reputational risks. As you know, if you are very good on climate action today, you end up higher up in the ratings. You get rated better by financial organizations, and as a result of which you can access more money. And that I will come to later. But let me deal with the third one, which is license to operate. There have been a number of occasions where, because of the actions the organization has taken in the space of climate and in facilitating communities near the areas where we've operated, whenever any issue has happened, the local community has often helped us tide over the difficulties that we have faced. It's happened rarely, but whenever it has happened, it is a goodwill that we have been able to dip into. So here is another area of risk that strong climate action, being a responsible corporate, has helped us overcome. Let me then come to how climate action has helped us access money. Till recently, it would do nothing. Lenders wouldn't really care. They would talk about it, but they wouldn't give you any benefit for taking strong climate action. But today, as some of you may know, there is something called sustainability linked bonds. And these sustainability linked bonds give you a reduction in interest rate if you achieve some ESG goals. This, I think, is a very good step forward because it will facilitate climate action in many, many organizations. We've often complained that money from the GCF has not flown and there is no money coming. The commitments of $100 billion per year are not happening. Well, the good news is some money has now come into the country and is actually searching for places for investment, especially in the MSME sector. But a lot of investors are actually looking for clean technologies to invest in. We have often got investments from IFC, and IFC has its portfolio of investments. A few years ago, 33% of their investments were in climate technologies or businesses that were uh, contributing positively in the area of climate action. That percentage has likely grown. In recent times, a $250 million investment in our electric vehicle business has resulted in a $9 billion valuation. A valuation which is disproportionately high compared to the rest of to the mother business. But then, as you know, these things have happened to Tesla and more than Tesla, the other companies who still don't have a car on the road but have very high valuation. So strong climate action. In fact, when BII came to invest, their biggest questionnaire was in the space of sustainability. And having a good record in sustainability ensured that the investment went through. So today it is possible because of climate action to access funds and investments. We've also seen that because of the work we've done, a lot of the people who interview with us inquire whether they can join one of our climate friendly businesses, as in solar energy, electric vehicles, the work we do in circular economy, if they could join in places like that. And we've seen far higher engagement amongst employees from the time sustainability became a big thing within the group. The scores in employee satisfaction have gone up. The engagement scores with the organization have gone up. And so it's given us a sense that while climate action not only helps attract talent, it also helps in higher levels of engagement within the organizations. Some examples of progress, apart from all the commitments we've made, one of our factories became doubled energy efficiency or energy productivity in 4 years' time. The path that was given to us was 25 years, but we discovered that through appropriate use of technology, it was possible to achieve it much faster. The parent business is more than halfway there, even though there is another 15, 16 years left in the runway to doubling energy efficiency. Again, adoption of energy efficiency, renewable energy, biodiversity, zero waste to landfill, water positivity, etc., has resulted in our Igatpuri plant being the first certified carbon neutral plant of the country. These are all, today, these are examples that things can be done. It is extremely necessary to scale these actions so that tomorrow you will hear of many plants in the country who are carbon neutral, many businesses who are carbon neutral. We have a commitment to being carbon neutral by 2040. We made this commit. This is, however, on scope 1 and scope 2, which is what most of the commitments are for, because the challenge of scope 3 is a very big one. We will discuss it as the conversation goes along and if you have questions on it. So, I mean, having water positive locations, doubling energy productivity, our renewable energy proportion is about 50% today. And the only reason why we are not 100% renewable energy powered organization is because of the policies of the country. Every time, and if you all are familiar with the landscape, you would have seen that there was a time when the policies were very good in Karnataka organizations in Karnataka started adopting renewable energy. Then the policies became very good in Maharashtra. Organizations in Maharashtra started adopting renewable energy. Most of our factories are in Maharashtra. Today, we are more than 50% renewable energy powered. So these are some of the advantages we've seen of strong climate action. And we realize the question to ask is, how do you leverage climate action to do better business? And every time you answer that question, you do very well for the planet and for the business at the same time. Let me stop here. This is a summary of the Mahindra story, a summary that gives us a lot of lessons, a summary that shows us where climate action can possibly take an organization, and if you were to put it all together, where it can take a nation. We are at about 20 minutes past 8 now. I don't know how long the disruption was, but open to question answers.
Thank you very much, Anirban. Very informative, and I think you've covered a wide spectrum of interconnected yet slightly also broad issues, which are, I think, of a great interest. I can already vouch because a lot of these issues that you spoke about in terms of sustainable action, sustainable investment, its drivers, the fact that there will always be some dark horses, but we need to keep focusing on pushing the overall bandwagon forward is something that we discuss a lot in our group. And as expected, we have a number of questions. Some are specific to the Mahindra group, but some are also generally about the issue at hand, which is such a critical issue. So I'm going to start by inviting Ram Prasad, who will ask a very specific question about Mahindra Group, and it's more to do about how your actions are related to Scope 3. But I'll let him ask the question, and then we'll go to something very broad about India exports and climate. So, Ram, if you can hear us, if you can unmute and ask a question, and if you can, everybody who's asking their questions, please also introduce yourselves, Ram.
Yeah, is my voice audible, Shovan?
Absolutely, yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ram Prasad. I lead ESG at Licious, a D2C startup for meat and seafood.
You don't have to introduce Licious.
Yeah. So, I mean, currently, I'm just...
Are you a customer?
Yeah.
It is an organization that has actually got my wife to buy online. She refused to buy anything online, but Licious made it happen.
Okay.
Fantastic. Ram, please go ahead.
Yeah, Anirban, like my question is specific to country level, like as a conglomerate, how Mahindra is trying to demystify the question of Scope 3 emissions, because you have a large supply chain which is dependent for various operations or sectors and all. So how are we able to demystify this Scope 3 challenge, where data or on other aspects is a big challenge? So I just want to understand, like you have target for science-based target initiative as well for 2030. So I could see most of the part on scope 1 and scope 2, but I want to understand on scope 3 as well.
So Ram, demystifying scope 3 is work in progress. But the best thing about scope 3 is when it comes to businesses, somebody's scope 1 and scope 2 is somebody else's scope 3. So that is a very tractable part of the solution. So if you get everybody to become net zero on scope 1 and scope 2, you will address a large part of scope 3. However, the moment products come into our hands, as in customers' hands, then it goes out of the realm of this scope 1, scope 2 of each business. For example, when you and I use a vehicle, then the emissions caused by the use of fuel is something that has to, only way it will get tackled is through technology change. And that's why the transition from fossil fuel powered vehicles to electric, hydrogen, whichever kind of clean fuel that becomes the dominant thing, is going to play a big role. Let me just share the spectrum with you. About 5% of our emissions happen within the factory. A little more than 5 happens before the factory, that's supply chain, which leaves about 90%, which happens after the products go into the consumer's hands. And this is why the technology transition is so very, very critical. It is the same for the construction industry, where most of the emissions happen when we start living in the house and start using products. So there are some technologies which will help us solve it, but there is lots more to do, which is why actually there is a conversation on net zero and not absolute zero. Absolute zero today is unthinkable. So the effort is to try and go to net zero. I hope you're in a better place, Ram, in demystifying scope 3 as a result of this intervention. I know this is not the complete answer, and we could possibly have an entire discussion on scope 3 itself.
Thank you, Anirban. I'm going to quickly ask Sandeep to ask his question because he has to urgently leave for another call. Sandeep, sir, your question?
Yeah, I had posted my question earlier during your presentation, but hearing you, I take the liberty of changing my question. In the sense that countries like Germany have come up with this supply chain law. Now, as of now, companies which employ more than 5,000 people have to now certify the supply chains sustainable. Now, then that is scope one, more than scope 1 and 2. It's actually scope 3. So if they are sourcing from India, even if they're sourcing, let's say, garments, they have to really dive deep and find out if the supply chain is sustainable. Now, how does the Indian industry deal with these challenges? As our exports are growing and these barriers will come, how do you address them? Because companies like Mahindra, maybe you can do backward integration and maybe produce some of the stuff on your own and be sure of it. But when MSMEs are involved and they may be exempt from many of these environmental and other compulsions. How do you address this issue is what was bothering me.
So,
If I may, there is one more question related to trade barriers. Maybe you can address both together. So, Mitra, do you want to just unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you, sir. So my question was the European Union is is going to levy carbon border adjustment tax on India and the rest of the world as well, many countries. So, but India is seeking out exclusion for MSMEs, like Sandeep sir told. So, exclusion for MSMEs, it's India is seeking out from the CBAM tax. And so what are your views on this, considering the major value chain emissions in scope 3 are from MSMEs and corporates have little control over them? So is excluding MSMEs would help in the long run, or what are your views, sir?
This whole conversation there's actually a lot of noise in this conversation. First, just take a step back and again ask the question, what is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to get to a space where we are a net zero world or a net zero business. And that includes enabling the supply chain to become net zero. There will be a transition path. Just like Germany has introduced legislation as mentioned by Sandeep, India in its BRSR, in its new BRSR, wants organizations to mention what is the emissions that are happening in its supply chain. It's a first step to get to where Germany is today. But the reason why all this is happening is to enable the whole ecosystem to move to net zero. Now, as this is happening, there are trade issues developing. Will it result in some sort of disruption? It will, for sure. Luckily for India, the impact is expected to be low. Just as you know that we are asking for exemptions from MSMEs, you will possibly know I think 1.6 billion or some small number is the exports from India which are likely to get impacted by CBAM. But there will be a lot of conversation on this. When Europe is importing anything from anywhere in the world, the likelihood of the competition getting affected by CBAM, that the competition is not so much with the European companies, it is more with companies from the rest of the world, because anyway, Europe was importing those products and materials. Will there be transition impacts? There will be. But there is a lot of noise in this space. I don't think we should think too much about it, because our focus should be on decarbonization. The rest of it, we should let the trade people handle. this exemption for MSMEs, I don't know. It's a trade conversation. It is not a climate conversation. It is something we may want in the short run. I don't know how it will help the cause, but as long as if we get the exemption, very good. If we don't get the exemption, if it drives us towards faster decarbonization, if it helps us achieve our renewable energy goals, very good. Because what would MSMEs typically have to do? I mean, they would basically need to move to clean energy and adopt energy efficiency at scale. If you ask me, if an organization is not doing as much as is possible in energy efficiency and adopting renewable energy, it's actually burning money and it is losing money from its bottom line. So that is the perspective that I have. I know that there will be issues in trade in the short run, but there's a lot of noise. Yeah, there's a lot of noise over there, and the focus should not shift from decarbonization. That's the end goal.
There's a very different question that's just popped up, and so I'm going to ask Khushi to unmute and ask a question, a very personal question about people, not about the big climate agenda. Khushi?
Hello, Namaskar, sir. My question is that these days the sustainability professionals, a lot of people who are actually in the space, they suffer from the guilt of greenwashing. So how to protect oneself from it in future when we become sustainability professionals?
Did you say greenwashing or some other washing?
The greenwashing.
Greenwashing.
Okay. I thought there was
She's
a
saying
new
the guilt
kind
of
of
greenwashing.
Okay. So, when does greenwashing really happen? Greenwashing happens when you try to say that you are doing more than what you are actually doing. There is actually no need to do that. Today, there is no external pressure on you to make a claim which is not something that you can support through action. Typically, these claims get made because you want to make yourself look better than you are, or you want to comply with some legislation using words which are not necessarily supported by action. When, as you said, when you become a sustainability professional, if you focus on the actual work that is done and then report it transparently and properly, you will not face issues of greenwashing. But you only get there when you try to do something which is not necessarily kosher. Like, for example, there is ride-hailing company in the US which claims that it is a net zero company. They don't have a hope in hell of being net zero. And I have no idea what their maths are to say that the emissions that they are causing, which is increasing because they are growing as a business, and all the vehicles anyway that they have in their fleet cause emissions. What is it that they can possibly do to become net zero? Something that's beyond me. But then early days, people say a lot of things which are not necessarily kosher. This is why VCMI, ICVCM are coming together to create claims codes. But the rule of not greenwashing is the same as it has always been, Khushi. Don't say things that you're not doing. That's all.
We're almost out of time. I'm going to ask Parsuram to ask his question. She talks about definitional issues and how to navigate them as a young professional. Parsuram, if you can introduce yourself and ask a question.
Thanks, Vapan. Hi, sir. This is Parashuram. I work with Maruti Suzuki in corporate planning vertical. And my question is little fundamental. So I want to understand the ontological differences or relationship between ESG, sustainability, and CSR. So the reason why I'm asking this question is within my organization also, previously it was CSR and sustainability. It was one department. Now it's two departments. So we are setting up a ESG, and who will work under ESG? So there is something called corporate planning department. So there are, because of lack of clarity, or I would say that lack of at least some distinction between these three things. So So only that's the reason I asked this question. So over to you, sir. Thank you.
So, Parsuram, firstly, I am happy that Maruti is slowly joining the climate conversation. I am also looking forward to seeing big announcements in the move to clean mobility. But I'm sure the organization will get there. Let me deal with your question now. Okay. First, CSR is just one source of funds. It's a source of funds that has been created through legislation, and there are some fixed areas where this money can be used. That's all there is to CSR. Sustainability, when you look at it from an organization's perspective, is everything that a company needs to do to continue to exist in the long run. In fact, if you break everything down, through all disclosures and all reports, companies try to tell their stakeholders two things. One, that we will make money in the short run, and two, that we will continue to exist in the long run. That's all that companies have tried to tell them. All the stories, all the numbers, all the analysis, they answer these questions partly or fully. In future, companies will also have to say that we will make money in the short run and continue to exist in the long run and not affect the planet or the society in a negative manner. So this is what sustainability is all about. And if you take these actions well, you will be a resilient organization. E, S, and G are three subsets of this sustainability conversation. If you ask me, there should be another thing added on, which will ensure that the company's products and services will be climate friendly in the future. And that is not necessarily covered by E, S, and G. And therefore, to my mind, E, S, and G are subsets, but the union of E, S, and G does not reflect corporate sustainability completely till you add on that bit of ensuring clean products and services of the future. So that is how, in my mind, I differentiate CSR and I differentiate sustainability, and I see ESG as a subset of sustainability. I hope that helps you, person.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. And these structural changes do happen. I mean, I've seen it happening within our own organization as well. If you look at it from a task perspective, CSR, okay, the areas in which you can invest in are defined by Companies Act. You stay with that. That's where your areas of action are. There are some overlaps. For example, you can plant trees. That is an overlap. And there are some things you can do in CSR which have strong climate impact. So to that extent, there is an overlap. But remember, CSR is a source of money. That's all. When it comes to ESG, the primary task is decarbonization in the environment space. Then, of course, there is treating your people well, treating communities well, and ensuring transparency and etc., which typically is the job of the secretarial team, if there is one.
Fantastic. For the last question, I actually have a batchmate of mine from IIFM who I met today after 15 years, who's just happened to come to meet me and he's sitting across the table. So I'm going to give him the prerogative of the last question since I happen to be moderating. So Priyank, why don't you ask your question?
Hi. So my basic question, Anirban, here was basically around when we talk about a company becoming a carbon zero, for example, Mahindra saying that it's going to become a net zero company. How do you prioritize, or what percentage of that goal achievement are you going to do by offsetting carbons through technological advancements in the processes, and how much of it you are looking for offsetting through the external investments? And how does a company really take that decision of how much they're going to invest into either of the sectors? How do you prioritize that?
Okay. So the business lens is this, whenever you offset, it is a cost to the business. So if we chose to offset all our emissions, it would be a huge cost to us. So the first priority is decarbonize, decarbonize, decarbonize. So you have much lesser to offset. So the same thing holds for renewable energy. And I'm doing an analogy. Say today, if I wanted to power the entire business using renewable energy, maybe I would need 1,000 megawatts of it over time. But if through energy efficiency, we were able to reduce our energy consumption by 30-40%, then we would need only 600-700 megawatts of renewable energy to buy or set up capacity or so on. Same thing holds for offsets. How much money I will spend on offsets depends only partly on affordability. The other bit is, of course, how do I ensure that what I have to offset is as low as possible, given the technology options and business options that are available to me today. This is the way we look at the two of them. And any business that tries to offset its way out of issues is actually going to put its core business at risk because of the amount of money that they're going to put into offsets. The only exception are organizations who have very high free cash flow and very low emissions. So you will possibly say some IT businesses and some other businesses whose carbon footprint is lower, but whose free cash flow is much higher. They are the only ones who can even think of offsetting their way out of trouble. I hope that helps in some way and doesn't raise even more complicated questions for you.
It does, but I think that's for a separate discussion. Thank you so much.
All right, so we are beyond time. We have 10 minutes extra. I think we can close here. Anirban, thank you very much for a very illuminating talk. And I think thank you so much for responding to a lot of these questions candidly. As mentioned, we will reach out to you, especially like the director said, we are trying to orient our courses, Anirban, now to meet market demands and trying to evolve new sub courses. So it'll be great if in that process we can benefit from your feedback, guidance as we evolve these curricula. And yes, of course, our ever-standing demand is that help more of our students get placed across the industry. You have influence and connection not only in Mahindra, but across the spectrum of Indian corporates. So we will lean on you for that as well. Any final words that you'd like to share with us, Anirban? Otherwise, I'd like to very, very deeply thank you and express gratitude on behalf of IIFM and the Alumni Association, and then we'll close. Over to you for any last words.
Well, all I can say is that each of us will have opportunities to make a positive impact in this journey towards a net zero world. Many of us will have to be creative in finding out opportunities. I just hope that given the fantastic background that you've received in your education from IIFM, you will be able to find those paths for yourself and make a positive contribution, because every bit will help. And Swapan, is it okay to give a plug for your organization?
Sure, absolutely.
So one of the reasons why I feel privileged to be here in the conversation is you actually have an alumnus like Swapan, who's an absolute expert on the subject, has made huge contributions already, has helped one of our organizations in their biodiversity work. And there are very few questions which he doesn't have an answer to. In fact, today in the entire carbon market space, whenever anyone asks for an expert from India, I make it a point to refer Swapan. I hope, Swapan, you get some great opportunities to make an impact in the world.
Thank you very much, Anirban. That's Anirban actually does that, and because of him, I represent India on various fora, and I'm very thankful for that. And thank you very much for those kind words. I think with that we'll conclude. I also just wanted to mention that our next Friends of IIFM is actually going to be in person in IIFM in end of July, and our very own alumni, V. Varalakshmi, is going to talk about supporting inclusive growth in the poly-crisis environment. That's the subject. We'll be in touch with the exact date and timing. And Anirban, you're also welcome to join us. The director was very, very keen to host you. And if you do ever get a chance, I'll be in touch around that time. It'll be great for you also to be there in person. Thank you again very much. Thank you everybody for joining us in today's lecture. It has been most insightful, and we'll all be in touch. Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.